The United States in the early 1860s was a nation pulling apart. On the surface, it might have seemed like one country, stretching from the Atlantic to the Pacific. But underneath, deep cracks were forming, growing wider with each passing year. The ideals of unity and shared purpose were being severely tested. People across the land, in the North and in the South, felt a growing unease about the future. They could sense that the arguments and disagreements were becoming too intense. The very foundation of the American experiment felt increasingly fragile. It was a period of profound anxiety and division, a time when the promise of one nation, indivisible, seemed to be slipping away. The central issue, the one that overshadowed all others, was the institution of slavery. In the southern states, the entire economy and way of life were deeply intertwined with the labor of enslaved African Americans. Large farms known as plantations cultivated crops like cotton and tobacco, which were highly profitable. This agricultural system depended entirely on the forced work of millions of enslaved men, women, and children. For many in the South, defending slavery was seen as essential to their prosperity and their heritage. They viewed any attempt to limit or abolish it as a direct threat to their existence and their societal structure, a structure they were prepared to defend. In contrast, the northern states had developed a more industrialized economy. Factories and commerce were the engines of growth, and while some northern businesses profited from southern cotton, the reliance on slave labor within the North itself had largely disappeared. A powerful moral and political movement known as abolitionism gained strength in the North. Abolitionists believed that slavery was a grave injustice, a stain on the nation's character. They argued passionately for its immediate end, appealing to principles of human rights and equality. Their voices grew louder, demanding action and challenging the Southern way of life, creating immense friction between the regions. For many decades before the war, political leaders had attempted to find solutions and compromises to hold the fractured nation together. Measures like the Missouri Compromise and the Compromise of 1850 were designed to balance the interests of free states and slave states. However, these efforts only provided temporary relief. The fundamental disagreement over slavery, its expansion into new territories, and its moral implications proved too profound to resolve through political negotiation. Each attempt to bridge the divide seemed to only delay the inevitable, as bitterness and mistrust continued to escalate. The country was on a tragic path toward a conflict that would redefine its very soul. The election of Abraham Lincoln as president in November 1860 served as the final catalyst for the southern states. Lincoln, a member of the newly formed Republican Party, was opposed to the expansion of slavery into the western territories. While he initially stated he had no intention of interfering with slavery where it already existed, his election was perceived by many in the South as a dire threat. They feared that his presidency marked the beginning of the end for their slave-based society and their political power within the Union. His victory, without a single Southern electoral vote, signaled to them that their influence was waning, and extreme measures were considered necessary. In response to Lincoln's election, South Carolina became the first state to officially secede from the United States in December 1860. Within a few months, 10 other southern states followed suit, declaring their withdrawal from the Union. These states joined together to form a new nation, which they named the Confederate States of America. They elected Jefferson Davis, a senator from Mississippi, as their president. The Confederacy was founded on the principle of states' rights and the explicit protection of slavery. They believed they had a constitutional right to leave the Union and form their own government, a belief the federal government vehemently denied. The simmering tensions erupted into open warfare on April 12, 1861. Confederate forces fired upon Fort Sumter, a Union-held fort in the harbor of Charleston, South Carolina. This attack marked the official beginning of the American Civil War. President Lincoln called for volunteers to put down the rebellion, and the remaining states in the Union rallied to his call. Initially, both the North and the South were optimistic, with many believing the conflict would be short-lived, perhaps lasting only a few months. This proved to be a tragic miscalculation, underestimating the depth of conviction and the brutal realities of modern warfare that lay ahead for both sides. The war raged for 4 devastating years, from 1861 to 1865. It became the bloodiest conflict in American history, with casualties numbering in the hundreds of thousands. Brother fought against brother, and communities were torn apart by divided loyalties. The scale of the battles, the introduction of new and more lethal weaponry, and the sheer human cost were unimaginable to those who had anticipated a swift resolution. The war touched every corner of the nation, leaving an indelible mark on its landscape and its people. The initial confidence on both sides gave way to a grim struggle for survival and national identity, a long and arduous journey through suffering. Abraham Lincoln shouldered the immense burden of leading the nation through its darkest hours. His primary objective from the outset of the war was the preservation of the Union. He believed passionately that the United States was an indivisible nation and that secession was illegal. Lincoln faced enormous political pressures, military setbacks, and personal grief, yet he remained steadfast in his resolve. He navigated the complexities of the conflict with a blend of political astuteness, moral conviction, and profound eloquence. His leadership was crucial in guiding the North through the trials of war, constantly reminding citizens of the principles for which they fought, even as the conflict evolved. A pivotal moment in the war, and in American history, came on January 1, 1863, when President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. This executive order declared that all enslaved people in the Confederate States still in rebellion against the Union were thenceforward and forever free. While it did not immediately free all slaves, particularly those in border states loyal to the Union or in Confederate areas already under Union control, it fundamentally transformed the nature of the war. The fight was no longer solely about preserving the Union. It now also became a struggle for human freedom, adding a powerful moral dimension to the Union cause. The Emancipation Proclamation also had a significant military impact. It officially authorized the recruitment of African American men into the Union Army and Navy. Thousands of formerly enslaved men and free black men rushed to enlist, eager to fight for their own liberation and for the defeat of the Confederacy. These soldiers, often serving in segregated units like the famed 54th Massachusetts Infantry, fought with extraordinary bravery and distinction. Their participation was vital to the Union war effort, and their service challenged prevailing racial prejudices, demonstrating their courage and their commitment to the ideals of liberty and equality. Throughout the war, numerous major battles shaped its course, and remarkable figures rose to prominence. The Battle of Gettysburg, fought in July 1863 in Pennsylvania, is widely considered a crucial turning point, ending General Robert E. Lee's second invasion of the North. On the Union side, generals like Ulysses S. Grant eventually emerged to provide the strategic leadership needed to achieve victory, known for his relentless pursuit of Confederate armies. For the Confederacy, General Robert E. Lee became a legendary figure, admired for his tactical brilliance even in the face of overwhelming odds. These men, and the countless soldiers they led, became central figures in the American story. The long and brutal conflict finally drew to a close in the spring of 1865. On April 9, Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered his Army of Northern Virginia to Union General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia. This event effectively signaled the end of the Confederacy and the cessation of major hostilities, though some smaller Confederate forces took longer to lay down their arms. The news of surrender brought a mixture of relief and exhaustion to a war-weary nation. The guns fell silent, but the echoes of 4 years of devastating fighting would linger for generations to come as the nation faced the daunting task of peace. The outcome of the Civil War was definitive. The Union was preserved and the Confederate States of America ceased to exist. Perhaps the most profound consequence was the abolition of slavery. Shortly after the war's end, the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was ratified in December 1865, formally outlawing slavery and involuntary servitude throughout the entire nation. This monumental change addressed the central moral failing that had plagued the country since its inception. However, this victory came at an unimaginable cost, with over 620,000 soldiers losing their lives and countless others wounded physically and emotionally. The nation was whole again, but deeply scarred. The impact of the Civil War on the United States was transformative and far-reaching. The federal government's power was significantly strengthened over that of the individual states. The South, in particular, was economically devastated, its infrastructure shattered, and its agricultural system in ruins with the end of slave labor. The period that followed, known as Reconstruction, from 1865 to 1877, was an attempt to rebuild the South, integrate formerly enslaved people into American society, and redefine the terms of national unity. This era was fraught with challenges, successes, and ultimately, many unfulfilled promises, as the path to true healing and equality proved long and arduous. The Civil War fundamentally reshaped the American identity. It tested the very foundations of the Republic and answered the question of whether a nation conceived in liberty could long endure such internal division. While the war preserved the Union and ended slavery, it left behind a complex legacy of regional bitterness, racial inequality, and unresolved social issues. The struggle for civil rights and for the full inclusion of all Americans in the nation's promise would continue for many decades. The sacrifices made during those 4 terrible years served as a somber reminder of the cost of disunity and the enduring importance of striving for a more perfect and just union.